Pokemon Detective Pikachu out in cinemas now, film based on the most profitable franchise in history. I'm sure everyone knows at least what Pokemon are, but nonetheless I want to take a chance to briefly review the history of the brand because it is quite interesting. So it all started in 1996 when a bunch of video games were released for Nintendo Game Boy, a small handheld console. Those were classic Japanese RPGs where you have a team of fighters that you develop through many encounters with different enemies. You discover new areas, you expand your team, and there's a story somewhere in there about becoming the strongest Pokemon trainer in the world, but let's face it, it's not the key element. Now, despite the fact that the games copied many elements from the competition, something made them widely successful, not just in Japan, but all over the world. With the new Game Boy Color a few years later, a new edition of the games was released, and by then the franchise was probably unstoppable. I mean, we're at the point where entire generation of kids grew up playing those games. I was one of those kids, and I didn't even have a Game Boy. Me and my friends from primary school used to have a computer program to emulate the little console just so we could play them. This was a phenomenon for us. This was something that we talked about before school, during school, after school. And the clever bastards from Nintendo knew that and knew how to exploit that. On the backs of the games, they soon released a cartoon series following Ash, who, like the protagonist of the games, wanted to become the best trainer ever. The series ran for several years, and similarly to the games, it was a hit. And this really opened the floodgates fully. I mean, collectible stickers, trading cards, backpacks with Pokemon, t-shirts, toys, teddy bears, or rather teddy Pikachus, collectibles in chips bags, in Happy Meals at McDonald's, in packs of chewing gum. Pokemon were everywhere. Then there were a couple of movies, most of them released theatrically only in Japan, but the first one was definitely an event even in the West. And on it went, and despite the fact that Pokemon are no longer as massive in popular culture as they were at the turn of the century, they are still out there. And for the past few years, they have even been having a little renaissance thanks to the mobile game Pokemon Go, which I'm sure everybody's heard about. That one managed to do what none of the previous ones did, which is really to bring Pokemon to the true mainstream, outside of just kids and nerds. People of all ages and shapes suddenly went out to the streets to catch these little monsters. And now, as the new trend would have it, there came a time for a Western live-action movie. I remember reading about the announcement about a year or so ago. So Warner Bros. Decided to not make an adaptation of the cartoon, not make an adaptation of any of the previous movies, and not make an adaptation of the traditional fighting RPG games. They have decided to adapt a smaller game called Detective Pikachu, which focuses on a Pikachu that can talk like a human. And this Pikachu is also a detective and solves mysteries. And it will be voiced by Ryan Reynolds. What? I mean, on paper, this sounds like someone has had too much cocaine in their breakfast. It's an idea so mad that it seemed like either a joke or a headline generated out of random words pieced together. And then the trailer dropped, and I was on board within 20 seconds of it. I mean, it still looked absolutely bonkers, but the kind of bonkers that works, that is fun, and actually maybe even brilliant. So I was expecting a really good film, and I had a chance to see it this weekend. Did it deliver? Partly. Let me start with the good stuff. The titular Pikachu is fantastic, and I mean both the visuals, he just looks cute and fluffy and just real enough without being so real that it becomes creepy or weird. And of course the voice of Reynolds. I don't know how much of the stuff he says was in the script and how much he improvised, but a lot of the lines feel really organic, natural coming from him, natural and funny. I also like the first act a lot. So the setup of the story is that a 21-year-old kid named Tim lives with his grandma in a small town. His dad is a detective in the big city. They don't really get along or even spend time together. Tim gets word that his dad actually died in a car accident, and when he goes to clean up his apartment, he meets the talking Pikachu. Now, this little guy was apparently the former partner of the missing detective, and because apparently he's not really dead, But the Pikachu suffers from an amnesia, so the two pair together, and with Tim's ability to talk to humans and Pikachu's ability to talk to Pokemon, they set out to solve the mystery. Now, this sounds like a riff on the classic noir mystery, and rightfully so, because it is. And the movie fully realizes this and has a lot of fun with the idea. There are multiple wings to the audience and things lifted from noir, suspicious clues, a mysterious girl, the city at night. And this is another thing that the film does really well, the visual side. So the movie opens in bright daylight, and that's the way we get to see the city for the first time. The many humans and Pokemon working together in what seems to be almost like a utopia. And then once the story actually kicks in, we switch to nighttime with shadowed alleys, wet streets, and neon colorful signs. And I loved it. It was like one of the filmmakers said, listen, we're doing sort of a parody, but sort of an homage to noir. Let's have fun with this. And they do, and we do as audience, up to a point. Because as the story progresses and we eventually move out from the city at night, the film starts to sort of run out of the initial steam. Suddenly it decides to be more of a serious, let's say, tale, and moves the focus from the wonky characters and from the scenery and the quirks of the story to the main plot. Now, that to me is a bit of a mistake, because the more the plot unfolds, the more nonsensical it becomes. Around the halfway point, things start to become really, really silly. And I know that it sounds weird to call things silly in a movie about a talking Pikachu, for God's sake. But, it's just that the film first establishes the rules of the world and the motivations of the characters, and then kind of just ignores them. And this is actually quite a feat. The movie becomes at the same time completely idiotic and completely predictable. It starts throwing all those plot twists at us which come from a mile away, and you're watching it like, yeah, I know, let's just move on already. Then it goes on to the big set piece fight at the end, and there's almost no tension to it because we know from the first moment how it's going to end. So unfortunately, when you put all of this together, I ended up disappointed. And I want to say, not disappointed because of my initial expectations, the ones prior to seeing the film, but even more so the expectations that were built up by the film itself in the first 30 minutes or so. I wanted the movie to keep going in the direction it was going because it was doing so well, to be this fun little exercise in a comedy noir hybrid with Pokemon, because it worked really well. And then, as I said, it went off the rails completely to become a very mundane, very generic family adventure. And I suppose there will be people, especially younger people, who will love it, the whole thing. And that's fine. But unfortunately, I'm not going to be one of them, because when you show me how good a movie can be, and then you cannot rise above this mediocrity, then it's just not going to be enough.